Again, we're going to be talking about field selection and specifically how to deal with slopes in fields when we're landing out. The contents of this are: 1, why do we need time to assess our field before we land in it? How do we assess it? The general rules about landing up or down slopes, the optical illusions that you will encounter, and the approach speeds that you should be using. To make some sense of this, we're using a series of photographs of fields in South Wales, and we're viewing some fields now from the distance, and I'll just show you. So we've got a group of fields here that we've selected as looking suitable for an outlanding, and in particular I've selected this one, and to help us identify it as we go through the slides, we're going to use this tree. So this tree marks the field in particular that we're looking at. We'll also assume that there's no wind. So wind isn't a factor when we're deciding what direction and what sort of approach to make into our field. So what should the landing direction be given no wind? Should it be in this direction? And as we can see here, that would be passing over some farm buildings, and then probably the best run we could get would be landing diagonally across to the right hand corner. Or alternatively, we could land from right to left across low hedges and into our field in that direction. We need to think about slope, of course. So take a look at this field, and which way do you think it's sloping? To me, it appears that the right hand end is sloping slightly downwards, and it slopes back down to the farm buildings very slightly towards the farm buildings at the other side. Certainly the field is big enough. It's a pasture field, which we can look at a little bit better closer up. It's a biggish field in amongst some bigger fields. And a general rule of thumb, of course, when you're landing in a field, don't pick the smallest one you can see, pick as big one as possible. This has got low hedges on a boundary on this side, which is quite a nice feature, so we don't have to pass any tall trees and things like that. And on the other end, we've got obstructions. And that might lead us to think that perhaps our approach should be from right to left. Passing low hedges, landing short, and Bob's your uncle, we're finished. If we land from left to right, well, the buildings could be an issue for us, because we've got to clear those before we land in the field. If we look at slopes generally, look at these fields I've highlighted and ask yourself, are they sloping and which way? Because one of the peculiarities about perspective is the shape of the field can lend itself to giving you an impression that it's sloping when it's not, or vice versa. So to me, the one on the right hand side is sloping away to the right, down to the right hand side. The two other fields are both sloping high point at the right hand end and low point at the left hand end. Coming back to our field again, I'm looking at that. Let's see whether we can detect some slope now. And what we've done, this is the fourth photograph actually of this field, and I'm now starting to detect some slope in it. And it seems to me that it's sloping, a high point on the right and a lower on the left. So just changing the angle slightly, and when this down dip on the right hand side seems to have vanished altogether. Moving around again, I can see my field again, and yeah, it now appears definitely to be sloping. Low end on the left, higher end on the right. Moving around again, now I can see a definite slope. It wasn't so easy to detect before from the other view, but now I can see it is definitely sloping. And possibly, 15 degrees or so, so quite significant. While we're actually here, I'd just like you to take a look at the fields around. So on a little tangent, you notice that this field that we're now highlighting has got stock in it. It's actually cattle, and they're grazing on pasture land. And straight away, I can do a colour match. I can see the stock, and I can look at the fields around. And if they're the same sort of shade of green, then they're quite probably pasture as well. So not a bad little guide. But look at this field of stock and we'll compare it to this one. There's no stock in this field. It's the same colour, but there's no stock in it. And we wonder why the stock isn't moving from the right to the left down to that lower part. And giving the game away a little bit is a little stubby hedge there. And the extension of that, I happen to know, is a fence. Not easy to see until you spend a little bit of time observing your field and checking it out for this kind of hazard. However, moving on back to our field, we can see now as we move round to the 8th picture, this slope is now quite significant. It's 15 degrees, definitely, maybe even 20 degrees of slope. So quite a significant slope. Moving around again, yep, there's no doubt. This field is sloping. And that leads us to another issue. And that is, because the field is sloping, we can get a poor idea of our position on the approach. Typically, when we're landing on a slope going uphill, we can get the impression that we're actually too high, and in fact we're not, or not necessarily. So we must use a reference point. So select a reference point in your field and use that, and don't use the appearance of the field around you. That's the place that you're going, that's the place you intend to round out, and if that point, that reference point, is going up or down in your field of view, that's relevant. The rest of it is a pure optical illusion. As we come round further, and now we're flying over our field virtually, and we can look back at the terrain behind us, and you can see the Black Mountains. And it's quite obvious. It's bound there's bound to be slopes and hills around because we're in a hilly area. So it's not, it shouldn't come as a shock to us that some of our fields might be sloping. And in this particular case, the fields are just to the north of Langwells Lake and just to the south of the Black Mountains Gliding Club. Going back to our earlier view, just to remind you, this view here was where we had just started to discern that there was a slope in the first place. And just contrast that in your mind with the previous picture and how different it looks from here than when you're actually on the approach. Coming back now to our approach, we need to think about approach speeds. How fast should we be making our approach to land? Now, typically, if you're landing on a flat field, it would be 1.4 VS, so the unaccelerated stall speed multiplied by 1.4 will give you the minimum approach speed for landing. However, we're landing up a slope and we need more energy because we're going to round out up a slope, and then our hold off and touchdown and ground run will all be uphill. So a rule of thumb, add 1 knot for every degree of slope. So if we got a 15 to 20 degree slope, we need to add 15 to 20 knots onto our approach speed. And that can seem very strange at first, but I promise you the speed will dissipate very quickly once you've rounded out. Looking at your field as well, you'll have the impression that you're too high, which is another strange feeling. Use the reference point. If it's going up in your field of view, you're undershooting it. If it's going down in your field of view, you're overshooting it. And that's all that should matter to you on the approach. So, landing up a slope, 1 knot per degree of slope. Now some general rules about landing up slopes. First, never land down the slope. Irrespective of the wind, land up the slope. If you attempt to land down the slope, even if you're into wind, you may easily find that the glider is outperforming the slope, and so you don't touch down, or you'll touch down much later than you expect to. Use the reference point and not the appearance of the field as your guide for both the circuit and the approach. Have extra speed, so over and above your normal approach speeds, 1 knot per degree of slope would be a useful addition. If the field actually looks like it's sloping, then it's probably quite steep. So it's very difficult to discern shallow slopes at all. You may have to use other guides to determine whether it's sloping. The fields that we've been looking at are actually quite steep. After you come to a stop in a field like this, the next problem is you may end up rolling backwards. So once you come to a stop, and when you think everything's fine, and then you start rolling backwards down the hill and hit the hedge. So, and you can do a lot of damage like that. So to avoid sitting there like a lemon waiting for help with your hand on the brake to prevent the glider rolling, what you can consider is during the ground run, as you're decelerating, apply some rudder while you've still got steerage control, and turn the glider across the slope, and up 45 degrees across the slope, or even 90 degrees across the slope, so that when you come to a stop, you're less likely to roll down the hill. Finally, don't leave your selection of your field too late. You need time to look at the field and make the assessments and understand what you're actually dealing with, and if necessary, review it and select another field. The whole idea of perhaps having a group of fields, as we had here, is if the first one doesn't work, then one nearby may well just do the job, and a small adjustment, and you're back safe again. Okay, so thank you for watching. I hope that was useful, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.